Okay, Sergio.
Hello, good evening in Germany and good afternoon in San Antonio to everyone.
Good afternoon to you
And
too.
to you, Daniel, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. It's our 18th podcast. Amazing.
Yes,
Yes.
we're doing it.
Okay, cool.
Okay, well, let's start by I think we should say a little bit about who we are and what we do each session. I feel like sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. So I just want to start by saying, my name is Sergio Leal. I am a musician who studied a lot of psychology in college. That was my major. And I decided that I wanted to focus on educating people as best as I could and providing that side of what I learned and what I've been learning in the past 10 years, doing a lot of therapy and finding the right avenues to healing. After when I was 21, I learned a lot about um, the side effects that sometimes smoking and doing psychoactive drugs can have on some people, and it can awaken a lot of trauma. And that conversation is, you can see it in some places, and in some other places there's just not that conversation going. I think it's important, and I think it's led me to um, see where you can heal, how therapy works, where it's a little faster, a little slower. And um, that's how Daniel and I met. Would you like to say a little
Yeah,
bit about yourself?
perfect. Thank you very much, Sergio, for presenting that. My name is Daniel Zeiss. I'm a medical doctor and a psychotherapist, and I live in Germany, and I'm licensed in Germany and Spain. And yeah, so I'm here not necessarily to bring and talk about what regular psychotherapy or therapy is doing, but we talk about peak states of consciousness. And also, I'm also a certified therapist for the for the Study of Peak States. And peak states of consciousness it's a huge model, setup, modality, method, diagnostic way of looking at emotional issues, or what we call trauma, everything which does not feel calm, peaceful, and emotionally light, a little bit differently. Okay, and this
Mhm.
differently is that it usually is very quick. So if somebody has like a fear of heights, yeah, that's usually a thing we can very very quickly resolve. There are other things which take a while, and there's no guarantee that it will work. And that's the beauty with the institute, is that therapists work on a pay for results basis. So there's no like a paid friend thing. What in regular psychotherapy you just go every week or twice a week, and then eventually it gets better. It's really a very very short, very intensive intervention, and if you get the result, perfect. If you don't get the result, you learned something. The therapist also learned something, and hopefully next time it will go better. But that usually doesn't. It doesn't go south so often. So we have very good track record. I just went through my files, and it's about 91% where I could help, was able to help clients. And yeah, but there are some which who I can't help. So I then refer within the institute, or yeah, we depart and say, okay, we're sorry, and we just learned something, and it was an experience. The beauty is we can do everything on Zoom. Yeah, it's there's no intervention, no drugs, nothing special there. It's talking, it's tapping, it's visualization, it's meditation. It's a mixture out of everything, which you can easily do on Zoom. And yeah, I hope that
Great.
clarifies a little bit.
Yeah, no, that's great. I think that's important. I think it's good to know that kind of therapist you are, because that is the topic of today, right?
Mm,
We try to educate as well as not just talk about. You have an avenue that's not that well known, but to the people that you tend to work with, it's very quick, very effective, and I think it's important for people to understand that perspective, because EFT, trauma healing, these are modalities that are not on the front page of Google when you look, to be honest. Because as I was preparing for this talk, like the talk we're gonna have today is finding the right therapist for you, right? What makes a good therapist? What who should go to therapy? For people who maybe have gone, maybe they've always been curious, maybe they still hold that stigma. And so one of the things I did was I googled like the types of therapy, and I googled, like, one of the things that shocked me was um, I googled, like, what is the best thing for PTSD, right? Because PTSD is the one place where we find that we can talk about the word trauma without people going like, "Whoa, like I don't have trauma," Like we have a category where it's accepted by the popular kind of talk and the community and just people in general, that trauma is okay. Trauma is just for war heroes, war veterans, people who have been sexually assaulted, abused, and that's it. And so I googled that, and it was like, the standard therapy for the gold standard was like psychodynamic and exposure, and I was like, why is this on the front page? Why is there, like, why, if the word PTSD has trauma in the term has trauma in it, why is trauma not like a response, like a trauma therapy? Why is it not on the front page? So yeah, I just let's educate people. So with
For
that,
that.
what makes a good therapist? What is a good therapist in your opinion?
Well, that's a really tough question because if we could give a formula right now, then everybody would follow that formula, and within 2 years we would have a different world. But first of all, the therapist needs to be accessible. I think that's one of the main criteria. So if you have a therapist who just has phone hours from 1:45 to 1:55 for 10 minutes every week, that's a therapist who's not accessible. Okay,
Okay.
and even if it's just 55 minutes per week, that's also very little to call. And sometimes they are like from 6:57 to 7:23 or something like this. That's not really accessible. So
Okay.
I would recommend to look for a therapist who you can access, who you can call. Okay, there are certain hours, so there are like hours from 1 to 2 every day or every second day or something like this, but easy to remember and within reach. Okay, so perhaps
Yeah.
one day in
Yeah.
the morning, one day after the afternoon, and one day at lunchtime or something, so that you can pick basically depending on your schedule how to or when to call the therapist or email. Okay, the easiest
Okay.
thing is write an email and say, I would like to have an appointment. I'd schedule an appointment with you. When is it
Yeah.
possible?
Yeah.
And then there's the next thing. If the therapist is booked for months, that might be a very good therapist, but he or she is not accessible to you. Okay,
Yeah.
so he's not of much use for you when you are when he's so booked and he's not responding to emails, or it takes time to respond to emails. So it takes 7 days or so. I mean, 1 or 2 days, that's okay, I think. But it's not if it takes more than 3 days, I would say that's very inaccessible. Except
Gotcha.
when there's an out of office message, when there's like, okay, I'm on vacation or
Okay. Yeah.
I'm on the conference or something like this, then
Yeah.
I don't have access to my emails. That's something I would say, okay, that's yeah. So yeah, when I started first at looking a therapist, that was actually the thing which drove me crazy. Okay, because I contacted colleagues because I wanted to go into the field of psychotherapy, and I contacted them and I wanted to ask them if they can work, because if you do psychotherapy how you say that, formation, or if you do the training, you
Yeah.
have to do psychotherapy for yourself as
Yourself.
well.
Mhm.
And then you write an email and you don't get an answer, and you send a second email, you don't get an answer. Okay, so it's a little bit frustrating.
Yeah.
Um, and then accessible also not only communication wise, but for you. So for, as I said, I work on Zoom, so I'm accessible worldwide. Perhaps on the ISS I might have a problem because the bandwidth might not be enough. I don't know, but worldwide, if you have internet, if you have access to the internet, then you can work with me.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
some therapists say no, we just work in person, and that might be there might be a good reason to do that. Okay, for example, in schema therapy, you need chairs. You need to have many chairs and walk around and then take a different perspective on the problem. So if a therapist specialized in that, um, he or she might be a very good therapist, but he just works or she just works in that local city or where you can travel. So if you have to travel 3 hours to go there, 3 hours back, it's a 6-hour path away. Then doing that every day, every week would be a burden a little bit. So you
Yeah.
look within your within your reach. Perhaps in 20 or 30 minutes you can drive or go by public transportation. So that is also the part for accessibility.
Gotcha. When you're saying a lot of these things on accessibility, do you also mean like after hour? Were you talking about after hours as well? Because like I know, for example, when I first started doing therapy many years ago, and I was going through a very difficult patch where I realized I felt like I couldn't, if something really turbulent was going on inside me, I felt like I needed my therapist, right? Like right then and there. And sometimes like that's not necessarily possible or even healthy. So I would have a session and maybe a day or two after I would like email my therapist and ask her like, "Hey, I'm not feeling like I'm feeling this. I'm not feeling well. Like what should I do?" That's not always like the best thing, but at the same time, is that something you were talking about, like that type of accessibility where if you're in need of some kind of assistance or you have a question or you have something, is
Yes,
that what you
as
meant?
well. First of all, I meant the accessibility with taking or getting into contact.
Yeah.
So that needs to be easy. It needs to be possible. If you have to get up at 5 every morning, and not the morning you call him to
Right.
have call at 6, that's not really convenient. And yeah, so getting in contact, accessibility really important. And then when
Yeah.
you're in therapy, that you have accessibility to your therapist makes a lot of sense. Though, as you mentioned correctly, sometimes it can be even very healthy not to contact the therapist and work through that issue on your own. But that depends really on your situation and what the therapist is doing with you.
Right.
And and perhaps you have gotten some homework and you should work through something and then write something, and then you when you write something down you feel some emotions coming up and you overwhelm, and perhaps that is actually the purpose of that homework, so to
Yeah.
make you aware that there's emotion and that you learn with the skills or with the tools that you discussed in therapy, that you learn to handle that on your own. So but that's something your therapist should explain to you. Okay,
Okay.
so transparency is the next big thing. Therapist talks to you, and then when he or she talks to you, makes it very very clear what's going to happen or what's required of you or what's necessary for the next step. And sometimes that's not the case, okay, because the therapist is doing that for 10, 20 years. It's always the same, and for you it's the first time, so
Yeah.
you have completely different perspectives, and sometimes there's something missing, some information missing for you, or the therapist didn't pick up on what you were needing as an information, and then there's a miscommunication. And so transparency and communication skills are really important.
Okay. Communication, accessibility. That's yeah, I agree. What are some things that you think are red flags with therapists, with somebody in therapy? I'll give one really quick.
Yeah.
Uh, I was working with a very good therapist. Um, I mean, she was a bit older, however, and I think she was getting to a point where maybe, in my opinion, she wasn't maybe um, health wise ready. She shouldn't have been a therapist, though. And so a couple of sessions, she fell asleep, and and that was like that really affected me. I was like, oh man, like I must be really boring. But she was also just very old, and she was somebody that worked with me when I was like, um, she was. I had a very specific set of. She had a very specific set of skills. She was like the guy from Taken, from the movie Taken. She was very good at that. So for me, it was very difficult to to find a way to just be like, man, this is really frustrating, but I also really need her. And I feel like a lot of people might find themselves in those kind of situations where they're like, oh, this isn't really working for me anymore, but I'm having trouble finding a therapist, or how can I find a better therapist? Like what if, what if this is as good as they get and then I find worse therapy or something like that. So what are some things that you think are like moments for you to move somewhere else? And you already said accessibility is a good way of finding a good therapist, but what are some red flags you've seen?
Yeah, I will come to the red flags immediately, but I love that example that you've given, and
Yeah.
and we can use that example for a small therapy session right now. So, she fell asleep, and you felt, oh my god, I must be what
Oh,
did you
I
say?
must have thought, like, I'm sure I thought that, but like
Yeah,
that what I'm saying is just not that important. It just hurt, when
yeah,
you're
it
kind
hurt.
of giving yourself and your problems, and then they're asleep. Yeah, it sucks.
And try to find a different way of interpreting her falling asleep. Can you find one?
Yeah, definitely. I think she was just like a lot older. She was in her
Okay.
70s,
Okay.
and yeah, I think when you're at that age, like there are just things that are very difficult,
Not
and
every
and
70-year-old person falls asleep or
yeah,
falls asleep in a
and
conversation.
it's
But
emotionally taxing. Yeah.
no, no, now, a different way from your point of view. Okay, what did you do that she fell asleep? On the one hand, you said you're boring. One must have been boring, but on the other hand, what could have been?
Well, no, I don't think I was boring. I think my stuff wasn't boring. I think it was maybe difficult or repetitive, or
Okay,
like the
now,
same
now
kind of
now
situations.
try to spin that a little bit and try to find what else.
About me?
Hmm, about you. Any idea?
No. I mean,
And
I think I
just saying that because that's one of the big resources and features you have.
I don't know. I mean, I thought it was just I just thought that what I really don't have an answer. I thought that it was just very I thought it was rude, but
Yeah,
I
of
from my
course.
perspective, like something that I did wrong or something that affected me, I just think that it was just okay. I thought this. I thought that it was like too hard for her to do these things and to help me, so it was just easier to fall asleep.
My interpretation was your voice is so harmonic, and she was tired, and you made her fall asleep.
I was singing. I was lulling her to sleep. That could have
Yes.
been it. That could have been it.
Well, that's your job. You're working with your voice, so that's
Yeah,
for me the. But I understand it's a red
maybe.
flag. When the
Yeah,
therapist falls asleep, then it's a red flag. Um, Another red flag if there's like touching or being like, oh yeah, and flirting and all this stuff. That's another big red
sure.
flag. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
nothing. And other red flags, let's see, when for example there are money issues, so it's not transparent at the beginning what your participation, what your costs are going to be. You shouldn't be doing that. And for me, one red flag is blaming. Okay, so if the therapist starts blaming the client, you to that something you did something wrong, yeah. So, and that is a huge red flag, and that is very, very, very common in the therapist realm. That the therapist is right and the client is wrong. And why is
yeah,
it common? Not because therapists are bad or something, but they're human as well, and they have an ego, and the ego is always there trying to protect oneself and making the other person wrong. And so, but for therapists, it's important to understand that and try to observe what they're saying. And so that would be a red flag. The therapist accuses you of having a therapeutic, no, a behavior which inhibits therapy or something like this. And I would say it's a red flag.
okay. I
Yeah.
yeah, no, I agree. I think there's some I read recently. I think that's my concern with I think there's more and more MDMA based psychotherapy going on, and while that's great, I think there are some pros. I mean, I might have my biases, but I do think there are some pros to that. But I recently read that there was a case where they were doing these studies, and they're kind of building up the research, and there's two therapists and one client, and they were doing this like MDMA assisted therapy. And well, for people who don't know, MDMA is very much like ecstasy. I don't know if it's exactly like ecstasy, but the feelings are these feelings of love and connection and intense, very intense. And that girl was basically, I think it was a girl, she was basically taken advantage of, um, because they were all in these states.
Hmm.
And the boundary thing comes up. But I know there are some therapies where, like, I think like cranial sacral therapy, where it's like there is some kind of touch based thing. So I've always thought like, I've always thought like, is it a black and white, like binary yes and no kind of thing? Where I know some people might find that touch and connection can allow them to feel safe, and I know there are some therapies that do that. Then again, not all of them do that, right? And not all of them feel that as necessary. Like I know somatic experiencing, which is a trauma form based of therapy, and so is wholehearted healing for that matter, trying to teach you how to feel safe in your body through, um, in some kind of way, just focusing your awareness in parts of your body where you can kind of generate that feeling of safety, or take you away from that feeling of fear or pain to a place where the body may not feel, may feel safer. And they kind of create a space, and a space of safety, and of like a window of processing.
Right.
So
So when I talked about touch, I'm sorry, I didn't mean, I mean meant inappropriate touch.
inappropriate touch, got it.
And when there is touch, and that is exactly right as you said, there are some therapies that need touch, and there are clients who say, okay, that's my way to go, and they, because the other thing is exactly what they experience in their life, disconnection, and so they might be very open to be hugged or be supported. And then there are clients who can't because they have been touched, okay, and then they need that safety and distance and so on. So that
Yeah,
is something to experience, and that is actually something that a therapist learns during the training to see. And when there is touch, then needs always be to there always needs to be consent. And so you talk, you say, okay, you seem very, very sad. Is it okay if I support you and touch you on your shoulder? And then the client can say yes or no. And if a therapy involves that, it's a little bit difficult here with Zoom, right? But if a therapy involves that, then that would be the appropriate way to first ask and say, yeah, transparency, what you're going to do, and then get the consent of the client.
okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay,
Yeah,
cool.
absolutely. So, with that being said, what are the types of therapies that you believe? Um, I think we've talked about this before, but since we're doing it in this format, um, I know you might be a little bit biased on this, but what are the forms of therapy that you kind of tend to see people who are in them, um, where you see there's great benefit, and the ones that maybe don't serve that much benefit that maybe you've seen with clients, or maybe you've had clients who've come. Is that something you see, by the way? Do you see a lot of people that are like, I've been doing psychotherapy for forever and it's just not doing anything for me, so I wanted to give this a try? Because I've seen that in forums a lot. I've seen that in like Reddit, and I've seen that in forums where people are like, I did psychotherapy for 5 years, 6 years, and then I just realized, like, I heard about this and I did this, and it's been like a game changer. I read some recently. I was on Reddit and I saw this woman who dealt with she dealt with multiple sclerosis, and she did for a long time, for many years, and she still does. But she said that a functional doctor told her about somatic experiencing, and she's been doing it for many, many years, and she's now, I think, doing the training herself, and she says that a lot of her symptoms just are minimal to just went away.
Amazing.
Yeah,
Yes, and
that one was shocking because I didn't really know much about it before, but
yeah,
it's a very nervous system based in brain,
yeah,
and there's a lot of lesions, but
yeah.
that was wonderful to hear. Just so yeah, I'm sorry. Do you see that a lot? People coming in from other modalities to try something new with you?
So I just have two ideas to that question. The first one is, as long as you have cognitive and emotional parts within therapy. If you just have cognitive parts where you explain, where you understand, where you try to change behavior by changing just your thoughts, I don't think that this is going to be very successful. It might be in the short term, but from my point of view, you need to have the emotional aspect as well in that. Okay, and the emotional aspect can be like in schema therapy, an act where you work with the emotion, or it can be like in somatic experience where you actually work with the emotion and the
Body
energy,
sensation. Yeah.
yeah, body sensation, the energy in the nervous system. or like in peak states where you go back to the real origin of the trauma, and then you heal the trauma, and then the whole system reconfigures and resets, and then you feel different afterwards. So one good way to see if that therapy actually works is, from my point of view, if you get a state, or if you get a moment of calm, peaceful, and emotional lightness when you've done the therapy. Okay. So that is, for me, one indicator that something changed, something big changed. And we all know that because there's this saying, and you possibly have said it yourself, or perhaps you have heard people say it, that there's a weight falling off your shoulders, a weight falling off your chest, or something like this. Okay, that's a proverb. That's people say that, and that actually is the feeling of being calm, peaceful, and light, because something fell off. Okay, and now you're like, oh my God, things have changed. And if your therapy can get you to that point, then it's a great therapy.
Yeah.
If it doesn't, well, try something else to see what works for you.
Right. No, I agree. I think the biggest obstacle right now is the kind of conversation, specifically with trauma-based therapies. I honestly wish we just had a better word for trauma, because trauma is just like so. I've said this before. It's just so like
Yeah, there's
divisive.
some
Very,
semantic expectations and ideas around that.
yeah, the
So
power of
in
words,
the
right?
beginning, you said that from my point of view, there's big T and small t traumas and whatnot, or you just simply say, anytime you don't feel calm, peaceful, and emotionally light.
Yeah.
I think that's a brilliant definition. It's many times then. If you look at your life, when was the last time you felt calm, peaceful, and light?
Yeah.
Might be some days ago, right? So so it's a very high standard to get there, but I think it's a beautiful definition. Don't overdo it. Don't make it cognitive. Don't make it very intellectual, but just make it feeling wise. Okay, how do I feel? Do I feel good? No, I feel stressed. I feel agitated. Okay, so you're in trauma. Perfect. Okay. And if you now sit in your bathtub and completely chilled and relax, and you might not be in trauma. You might be actually in that state where you say, okay, I'm feeling good.
So a place to be when you feel like you're not in trauma is when you're kind of in the present moment.
Yes, that would be also very, very helpful if your present moment is not in the war zone right now. Yeah, but if you look around right now, there's not much going on in this room. So if you are completely in the present moment, then you would be very peaceful because nothing's going on right now in this room except this.
Right. Right. You're
Recording.
not thinking about other things, or you're not worrying about other things, or you're not
Right.
feeling a certain way. That's a good way of characterizing being in a present moment, is kind of being trauma free, even if for just a minute, right? You're like, nothing's activated, nothing's being
In that
triggered.
moment, right? When you're in the present moment, then you don't have any active traumas. But most people are not in the present moment emotionally and with their thoughts, and they still have trauma within their body. It's still stored there, but it's not active in that moment when you're in the present moment. And when you have certain states, like the states Eckhart Tolle describes in The Power of Now, when just at the beginning he describes when he felt so dreadful, and boom, afterwards he was feeling blissed out. But we're getting off track a little bit because we wanted to talk about a good therapist, or how to find a good therapist. And I would like to point out something really important. Trust your gut feeling. If you see a therapist and you say, I don't know, well, then take that into consideration. I strongly recommend trust your gut feeling. Okay. Then there might be something like the first impression you get, that's the gut feeling. Then when the therapist starts to talk and talk and talk, and then you start to think, and then there might be some doubts and so on. And this actually might be behavior which comes because you don't want to change, or you don't want to take that burden on you. And then you'd say, okay, perhaps I don't trust that, because otherwise you will not end up in therapy when you're always trusting these resistances that you have. But the first impression when you look at the therapist, try to use that.
Got it. So you're saying like sometimes people might have that gut feeling, and then they might try to convince themselves to not listen to it. They might overthink it and be like, no, but this and this and this, and maybe they are good. Da da da. Got it. Okay.
Now that's a very, very important role. And then usually in therapy you have the option to try. Okay, try 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 sessions. perhaps 4 sessions, and then you should know. After a month, you should know that if you can work with that therapist or not.
Yeah, that makes sense. I had a when I got back from, I did some holotropic breath work, which is a very intense form of breathing, um, that's supposed to kind of like shock the things that are kind of deep within you, a lot of pain, a lot of sensations to just come up and be like, all right, you need to like get up here and be felt. um it didn't really work for me, and I felt a shock to my system afterwards, where like I just felt awful for months, like really really bad. And I remember that I um went to a therapist that was like a somatic based therapist. I can't remember. She was trauma informed. uh but there was one thing that I remember kind of about what you're talking about, and she said, like, when you're feeling like this, she gave me a good recommendation, which was she there's like the sand you can buy, which is like kinetic sand, and it like sticks to itself. And so she was like, when you feel bad, just like really mold it and stuff, and that was helpful to an extent. But she also said things like, when you're feeling really like this, when you're activated and stuff like this, what you want to do is, treat yourself, like go get some food, go get some like greasy food and stuff like that, and eat that. And I was like, I
Well, you
don't
live
know
in
about
Texas.
that.
What do you
I
expect? You live in Texas, so that's greasy
Yeah,
food is right at every
it's everywhere.
corner, right? So
Yeah, for sure. But I just remember listening to my gut feeling and being like, I understand what you're saying, and it isn't. I think what she was trying to tell me was like, it's important for you to be able to stabilize your system so that you can begin to work through some of these things. And when your body's this active, like you just can't do that. And it was one of those things that you learn when you're kind of going through this yourself, when you have a lot of active feelings and sensations that you don't really know where they're coming from, but it's your reality. And it's one of those things that you learn along the way, like, okay, I need to find ways of calming my body. And I don't really go through that anymore, but there were, for a long time I did, where I didn't have, I think there are I think the word is like, it's not resilience, it's like basically this space. You have enough space so that you can be with your feelings and your sensations where they don't overwhelm you. um so it's kind of like space and resiliency. There's a word, I just can't remember it. And I think that's what she was trying to teach me. But I remember being like, this is not the therapist for me, because I'm not trying to like overeat or eat poorly or just watch TV when I feel terrible to kind of calm my system down. I need to learn strategies or techniques to help me either process as little as I can without overwhelming me, or find ways to create that resiliency within me. So I know what you mean. Like but some of that for me was based off uh, knowing what my body needed. And I feel like sometimes people coming into a lot of these, maybe they're depressed or anxious or whatever it may be. Maybe they're trying to get through somebody dying, or it could be, fear of heights, or a million things, right? It doesn't have to be a label. It could be just symptoms or behavior. um, they may not have this kind of knowledge that you build over time, maybe even when working with a therapist, that this doesn't work for me anymore, or this works for me. So but yeah, I know what you're saying about the gut feeling. I understand it. I don't know if it's the same if you kind of have experience, but yeah, I agree with that for
with
sure.
more experience, your gut becomes more sensitive to the situations and to what's good and what's not good. On the other hand, we discussed that in an earlier podcast. There's there's also remembering of bad things. Remember your food poisoning we were talking about some
Yeah,
podcast before. So then obviously your gut becomes very cautious. It's no, I'm not touching that food. I'm not touching therapy anymore because it hurt. And then, well, that's not helpful. Yeah, I mean, there is the possibility that therapy, and that's actually one thing in the consent, you in the written consent I do in the beginning, it says therapy can make you feel worse, usually just
right.
for a short period of time. But if you stop coming then to therapy, then of course you have the experience that therapy makes you feel worse and doesn't help you. But if you basically, yeah, rule out the thing that actually helps, that is there for helping, then it's really a little bit hopeless then the situation. So so the transparency to explain there is the possibility of having days, perhaps even weeks, where you feel bad when you go through some stuff, but it will change. It needs to change. Actually, the body needs to change, and it will change. And that's the experience. And then you need to have the resiliency to stick with it and see it a little bit through. But if that for like is going on for 3 months, then okay, think again. Yeah.
I understand. Yeah.
Um,
I think from my perspective, where I'm at and where I see therapy is that I I think that the work that you guys are doing is is great. Even if you have even if you have a skeptic mind about a lot of this work, because it, to when you first come into it, specifically the work you guys do, I think it just some of it seems so simple, or some of it seems so, but then you start feeling things you might have never felt before, right? There are so many things that I started feeling within my body that I not experienced for like 6, 7, 8 years in therapy, or even if I did, it was so spread apart that your body doesn't really start to see those patterns within itself. Like for me, when I start to release some kind of feeling, I can feel it moving in I feel this cold wave, or like this, it comes out through my chest, and it just releases a little bit. And that's something I never had doing psychotherapy. Don't get me wrong, it was great and it was very important. And I'm very thankful for the work and the people that took the time to help me. Um, but it was so spread apart that you wouldn't always know if it was working or not. And in a few, there's still a lot of things I'm dealing with, but there are things that I just don't anymore. And the difference between that and it going away in a span of time has been much different. It's been a lot shorter than doing psychotherapy. But I also do think that it's important for people to find ways to create resiliency and spaces within themselves, that I didn't have before I started this. So I wasn't able to hold more, like things would come up as I did this work. Um, and it was too much for me sometimes. So I feel like it's important to also, whether it's meditation, mindfulness, um, the aspects of somatic experiencing, for example, that are to create this resiliency and strength. Um, I think those are really important when doing this work too. But I definitely recommend this work, and I think it's where all sorts of therapy. I think all sorts of therapy need to have this,
and
taught.
and thank you very much for that, Sergio. And the when we talk about the tools, as you said, there's a great tool which I have on my YouTube channel. It's the loving yourself exercise. If you are really in it for the change, take that video, watch it twice daily for
Yeah,
at least 21 days, and do it. Okay, it's like a muscle. The more you train it, the more you train that inner feeling of loving yourself, the better you be in situations later when things are not that happy. So, from my perspective, we can't control our world. There are therapies out there that say we need to control the stimulus. Okay, we need to control what's happening in our world. So we avoid this and avoid that, and therefore we live happily. For me, it's like closing your worldview a little bit or very much, and that's not really helpful, because we're here to experience the world. And so if we close many things off, then we're not experiencing. So since we can't control what's happening in our world, how about being able to handle and having tools to handle
hmm
what's going on in the world? So if you have that tool, this loving yourself, if you do that meditation, you will feel a beautiful feeling inside. Eventually, perhaps not for the first time, but eventually it will come, and then you cultivate that feeling and you do it and practice it. And with practice, it's like riding a bicycle. You don't think about it anymore. And when you got to that stage where you got just think about that, I want to have that feeling, and boom, that feeling comes, and you don't even have to do all this visualization anymore. Then
yeah,
you have a tool which protects you in emotionally stressful situations, because then you in that situation you just think about that sensation, and you're like in a bubble of love from yourself, and love cannot be penetrated by anything. Okay, and so you just go through life differently. And that's if you don't do anything, just watch that video, practice, 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 and then you already have a tool which works, to my understanding, very well.
Yeah, that's great. That's great, and I agree. I think that's a great video. Um, well, the last thing I wanted to say was, for people who are of this idea that, you were talking about cognitive and emotional and the importance of
Mhm.
the emotional aspect. I think there's a book that talks about, it's like the rider and the elephant. The rider is your mind, your logical mind, and then the elephant are your emotions.
Mm.
And that, the rider should be able to control those emotions. But I think there's a book that talks about that, but I think that it misses this really, really important aspect, and that is that, I mean, the elephant is an elephant. It's huge. It's really
Exactly.
strong, and it has a mind of its own. So eventually, like, no matter how controlled it is, like, it's got much more force than the rider, and there's gonna come a point where the elephant's gonna freak out and it's just gonna go on a rampage, just like horses. Sometimes horses just, they take off. Um, and so I think it's more important that there that's where the analogy stops, to be honest, but that
Yeah, but
you
we can use
focus.
it. Let me
Right.
just use that because it's
Sure,
beautiful.
sure.
So when you are the rider and that below the emotions is the elephant, with the concept that you control the elephant, you will fail.
Yeah,
Okay, because
exactly.
as you said, the elephant will say, "Nope, I'm just going." Yeah, and then you can't do anything. And if you're unlucky, it just tramples you down. But what would you do when you're actually in the situation with the elephant? You would try to understand the elephant.
Mm.
You would try to become friends with the elephant. You would feed that elephant. Okay, you would feed it to gain its trust. And as soon as there is a connection, as soon as there's trust with the elephant, then the elephant considers what you want it to do. And then there has to be a giving and a taking from that. Okay, so you give food, and the elephant perhaps puts that leg up so you can crawl up. And then because you give food and you're nice to the elephant says, "Okay, you can ride me, and I'll go into that direction where you want to go." But if you take that spear or whatever it is and you poke it, then the elephant that hurts, then the elephant might throw you off. And so that's exactly how you deal with your emotional body, with your emotions as the elephant. If you gain trust, if you are there in a stable way, you're not shouting at yourself, you're not blaming yourself, you're not you're not against basically yourself, but you're for the elephant, you're for yourself, you're trying to gain your own trust, you're trying to gain your own confidence, then you will be able to control in a positive way as to guide basically that elephant through life. And then you have the power of a huge animal, which will help you to achieve many things.
Yeah,
Yeah.
beautiful. It's beautiful. Well, that's all the questions I have. Is there anything else you'd
Perfect.
like to add?
No, and I think that's our time. And thank you very much for listening when you got through. So we have the loving yourself exercise, and please do it. Please do it. And if you have questions, comment it under the exercise. Write us an email, and think about the elephant. Be nice to your elephant, and the elephant is going to be nice to you.
Perfect. Yeah, please ask us questions. Tell us what you thought about the video. If we missed something, if you disagree with something, if you have your own perspective, we would love to hear it. We just want to have conversations about this. And, as always, we're here to listen. I would like to leave with a quote that I saw today, that I really like. And it's by, I think it's by David Rico. It says, I think it's also by Rumi, but they're kind of similar. But our wounds are often the openings into the best and most beautiful parts of us. And I think it's important that we lean into these feelings, because that is where we're going to find the most change. So, yeah, thanks again, everybody. And Daniel, thank you for your time and your insight as always.
Thank you very much, Sergio, for having that chat and talk, and see you soon. Thank you.
All right.
Bye.